So for all of you who probably don't know who I am, my name is Sumaya. I will be your MC for this evening or afternoon. Morning, I don't know. I'm from England. I feel like it's already evening now. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I know it's pretty early in the morning in Toronto. And obviously, thank you to Sheikh for joining us today and Dr. Hussain Kimji. The timetables are on your tables. Again, I'm British. I will try and hold you to those as quickly and as accurately as I can. So when you are in your discussion groups, please keep that in mind that we do have a timetable that we're trying to stick to. So tea and coffee, there's 2 stations. There's there, and there's one on the other side near the other doors. If this one gets too crowded, they're both equal. You know, we don't. This evening is all about getting to know each other. There's no actual segregation. In fact, we're going to split you up later. Yeah, so without further ado, I would like to start off with our speakers. Sheikh Arif is someone who needs no introduction, especially for all of us who have been attending in the evenings, sorry. So I won't give him one, except to say that he is someone who makes you think.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله وحمدا كثيرا. I really wanted to sit there, but I've been forced by the Sheikh, to come and sit here. And I told him that, look, you are wudu, I am tayammum, and he said no. So since I've been put here, you'll have to put up with me. What I want to do really is, very, very quickly just introduce my new book. My new book, The Attributes of God in the Monotheistic Faiths of the Judeo-Christian and Islamic Tradition. This is the 2nd edition. So I will speak very quickly and very briefly, about the book. So in my preface to the 2nd edition, I'm saying that after publication of the 1st edition, although the book was well received, and I received many compliments, for writing the first ever published book about the attributes of God in the 3 great faiths, my own personal feeling was, that at some point I will have to revise the book and include some additional chapters, discussing also, the concept of, prophethood in the monotheistic faiths, because after all, the knowledge of the existence of God and his attributes was brought by the emissaries, of God, by the spokespersons of God, the prophets and the messengers of God. It was the messengers of God who explained, and answered the most fundamental questions, that human beings ask. Why are we here? What is the purpose of this life? Why should one die? Why do we get old? Is there life after death? These are all the questions. So the 2nd edition, therefore, is the fulfillment of the wish to include additional chapters discussing not only the concept of prophethood in the monotheistic faith of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but also to highlight the status of Abraham, Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, by including separate chapters discussing the mission of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam in the monotheistic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and also to discuss, even briefly, the status of Jesus, the status of Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam in the Jewish and the Islamic tradition. In the preface of my 1st edition, I had indicated the reason, for my writing, the book then. It was 2011, and primarily it was because of the misunderstanding of Islam, portrayed in the media. I was truly astonished, when I was driving one day and, I heard in a talk show a woman coming up on the radio and saying that a Muslim God is other than the God that Jews and Christians worship, or also the incident when Pastor Jones, burned the Quran. So, I really decided, that I should actually write, something about God in the monotheistic faiths, and that was the reason why I did, my first edition, which was received, quite well. It was also done for the students as well, and I think Professor Sachedina was here when I was launching the book, and he said that he might also use it in his class. So I was quite happy to hear that. Now, in the second edition, in discussing the concept of prophethood, I'm showing how similar also are these three sibling faiths in their beliefs about prophets. Muslims must believe in the chain of prophethood began with Adam, which is slightly different because the chain of prophethood in the Judeo-Christian tradition does not begin with Adam, but begins really with Abraham as the patriarchal figure. So apart from the difference, what is very interesting in the chain of prophets in these three monotheistic faiths is that we see two streams running, side by side. Why two streams? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. One from the children of Israel, that is, Israel's from the progeny of Jacob, that is Yaqub, and the other from the children of Ishmael, or Nabi Ismail, alayhi salam. So I had also indicated in my first edition the difficulty I had encountered was how to explain, one major theological difference between Christianity on one side and Judaism and Islam on the other side. The difficulty was, the status of Jesus, the status of Nabi Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam. Jews and Muslims do not consider Jesus to be the Son of God. But while Islam puts Jesus on a very high pedestal as the Messiah who will return in the end days, as the Quran actually tells us as well, what we believe, that Jesus will actually come back. Together with him will be a Muslim Messiah, Imam Mahdi Sabu Zaman alayhi salam, and together they will establish finally the kingdom of God on this earth, where there will be, the fullest, justice, social justice. And we have, this beautiful dua that we do every time in the Masjid, Allahumma kulli waliyikal hujjat ibn Hassan. So now, finally then, the table of contents, I'm sorry, my throat is slightly bad today. In the table of contents, so I've got, preface to the second edition, preface to the first edition, introduction, and then I've got 10 chapters. So chapter 1 is speaking about the existence of God. Does God exist? So we are trying to show that, very, very clearly. Chapter 2 is attributes of God, total attributes of God. In the Jewish and Christian traditions, about 28 attributes of God, just as we have Asma al-Husna, they have got attributes of God as well. So I'm discussing this, fully. Then I've got in chapter 3 is the attributes of God in the Islamic tradition. I'm discussing all the 99 Asma of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with complete explanation as well. And chapter 4 deals with the prophets in the monotheistic faiths of the Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions. Chapter 5 is Nabi Ibrahim in the Jewish tradition. Chapter 6, Nabi Ibrahim in the Christian tradition from St. Paul's view. So I'm trying to show that where St. Paul deviated from the real true teachings of Nabi Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam, because he wanted Gentiles to convert to the Christian, tradition. So after discussing that, chapter 7 deals with the modern scholarship and historical Abraham. Chapter 8, the status of Ibrahim in the Islamic tradition, discussed completely. Chapter 9, the status of Jesus in the Jewish tradition, and chapter 10, the status of Jesus in Isa ibn Maryam, in the Islamic tradition. And then I've got final word. I've got about 3 or 4 pages where I'm discussing the final word. What does Islam stand for? What do Muslims stand for? And then, of course, it contains complete bibliography, complete index. It is best not only for the education and general reading, but also for the university students, for their research essays, etc. I've got, my first edition is also available at the U of T, book stacks. In the second edition, we'll also go there. Now it sells for about $18.99 in the major bookstores, Amazon chapters. Here we'll be selling for about $12 and complete all the proceeds will go to oil, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this from us. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for your patience, your patiently listening. Thank you.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Is Islam relevant today is the topic that we are discussing. Obviously each table will be discussing this topic in principle, or should I use the word in essence, which will have several different forms. So each table will take on two subtopics within this broad question of is Islam relevant today. Now, the way we want to think around this subject is that what does Islam mean to us today? When we say Islam, do we even have clarity in our minds as to what we understand by the term Islam? And then when we say relevant, what is the meaning of relevance of Islam? So for example, somebody said to me the other day, he said, for the last 20 years I've been following a particular person. And before that I was following a grand marja for another 20 years. So how can we then say that we cannot follow them? Of course, that wasn't my discussion, but that's how somebody asked me a question. So I asked him, what do you mean that you are following him? He said, I learned my Islam through him. And I said, what of your Islam have you learned through him, for example? Have you spoken with him? Have you communicated with him? He said, no. I said, have you read any of his writings? He said, no. So I said, what does it mean that you are following Islam to a particular person? What does that mean in the first instance? So this is something that we need to clarify for our own selves. What do we mean by the word Islam? What do we mean by following Islam? What do we mean by relevance of Islam? How Islam ought to inform us in our daily lives? What does that question mean in its own self? Now, when we look at Islam in its own context, then we see that it came to a group of what we can explain nomadic type of people and barbaric type of people, according to the verses of the Quran and how they were. You are on the brink of falling into the fire had we not sent our messenger to you. That's what the Quran says. The Quran says, you were disunited hearts and minds, but Allah gathered your hearts together. Had you spent everything on the face of this earth, ma allafta baina qulubihim, you would not have been able to bring their hearts together. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace, you have become brothers. Then we look at the verse, Alladina, the people who follow the Nabi and Ummi, who they find mentioned inside Torah and Injil. He ordains to that which is good. He prohibits that which is reprehensible. He makes lawful that which is wholesome. He makes unlawful that which is unwholesome. And thereby, he breaks the shackles that tie you. He lifts the burdens of your shoulders. Now, when we look at this verse and we look at how the community progressed through Islam, we will see it has done exactly that thing. These people who were always fighting each other, who were very superstitious, who lacked confidence in themselves, who had every form of immoral practice that was ordained in the name of God. As soon as the Prophet brought the message, they went from that state of insecurity, immorality, ungodliness, to a state of moral people, a community, people who are confident in themselves, from people who did not know how to read or write to people who were told that if you learn to read and write, God will give you paradise. The Prophet incentivized them. From people localized to Makkah and the Arabian region to explorers. From people who did not know anything, and of course we always say this and it's common knowledge, to the fathers of the modern scientific method of data collection, examination of nature, comparison of information, and giving an adequate interpretation to nature. Now from where to where? And then think about it. The Blessed Prophet creates a League of Nations. An Orientalist has written, the barbarians who would kill each other, to people who are disciplined in the battlefield itself. That when Hayya ala Salah is called, they stand in ranks even within the battlefield. This is how much of an impact he had. He initiates the discourse on human rights. Again, the Hindu Orientalists, they say the first one to give voice to rights of women was Muhammad. He talks about the rights of orphans. Prior to him, if you look at the movie The Making of Genghis Khan, you will see how the situation, how hostile it was. People would kill each other, inherit the women and their children. And then they would be re-inherited by their first husbands, so on and so forth. And their whole morality was shaped around that. So the impact he makes in 23 years, and he loses only 350 odd people, and in return gives a League of Nations. So we can see that Islam did do something for them and something phenomenal. It went beyond Arabia, and it has lasted for 1400 years beyond the Prophet. It also has the dynamism that allows us to make sense of it today in our own context. To the extent that we think today we understand his religion more than those people understood it. Then we derive newer meanings and extrapolate newer understandings through what he had delivered. So these are the things we need to consider. Now when we look at the sources of Islam, fundamentally they are the Book of God and the Sunnah of the Prophet. Why do I not include any other Sunnah with the Sunnah of the Prophet? Because the Sunnah of the Imam, the Sahaba and the Tabi'een are mere explication of the book and the Sunnah of the Prophet. So we can subsume it within the Sunnah of the Prophet as a broad category. These are the sources of Islam. If we were to study the sources of Islam, according to our ulama, we find them in three broad categories. This will allow us to think more sharply around the subject and question at hand. The first category is known as theological teachings. Of course, the whole of the corpus of the Quran and Sunnah is known as theological teachings. But within theological teachings are teachings that belong to first theology. So we will call it, for the sake of convenience, teachings that belong to theology of Islam. What is consisted within the theology of Islam? The whole notion of the monotheistic God. Monotheistic God is not the conceptual factor of the Quran only. It talks about the unity of God from several different angles within the theological teachings. One is the unity of being of God, that He is one in His existence, He is one in His nature. But more than that, the theological teachings teach more than the notional unity of God is the unity in the authority of God. And as an outcome of the unity of authority of God, talks of the unity of devotion to God. In the unity of devotion to God, the theological teachings do away with all forms of intermediary in essence. When we look at those first early Muslim community, we find that this was something that liberated them from their superstitions and insecurities. They were able to break their idols through it, and they were able to take the reins of their destiny through this monotheistic understanding, not of the existence of one God, but devotion in its entirety to one God, and through Him to progress in life. Within the theological teachings as well comes the notion of the hereafter and what we are becoming. What is the purpose of life? So within the theological teachings we have devotion to one God and direction towards that one God. Two is, what are we supposed to become through the whole process of devotion? Where are we supposed to arrive at? These are broadly the theological teachings. And what is the relationship of an individual to God? What type of a relationship is it? Is it like the relationships that we had prior to Islam with the gods of the pagan? Or is it a very different type of a relationship, far more intimate, and this God is far more moral? So those are the theological teachings. Then we have the moral teachings. When we talk about moral teachings, we are not talking about morality as we talk about morality in the modern discourse. What ought to be done. We're not necessarily talking about that. In Islam, when we talk about moral teachings, we are talking about virtues. What is a befitting state for human existence? That the human being is a virtuous being. Now it impacts how we ought to be, but that's not necessarily how the ulama have discussed it. They make a sharp distinction between akhlaq and ahkam, or morality and regulation, whereas in the modern context we see that that distinction is a wrong distinction. But at least by the way in which the ulama categorize it, morality means a virtuous state of existence. What is a virtuous state of existence? Apart from be truthful, be altruistic, be forgiving, be trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, persevere, endure, have hope in God. Let that direct your general outlook and your general actions. So that is the whole part of virtuous existence. Why are these teachings there? In order for us to allow to become godly and go towards the purpose mentioned within the theological teachings. The third part of Islamic teachings are known as the regulations, or the regulative system, or the ahkam. In essence, these ahkam are there to inform us how a virtuous life ought to be led. So we need to explain this. Whereas, in essence, the principles of a virtuous life should inform us how the ahkam should be, here we have the ahkam explaining to us what a virtuous life should be like. Yes? In the modern discourse, what we will find is, well, what are the virtues and the morals that we should live by? And those principles will then inform us, well, how do you formulate them within an ahkam in a law system? Whereas in Islam, what we have in present day is, we have set of ahkam. The basis of this ahkam are virtues, as informed by the Quran and by the Prophet. So the ahkam are those indicators of how to lead a virtuous life. So whereas the virtuous life should explain to us what the ahkam are explaining to us what a virtuous life is. And maybe here is an indication of what we need to be thinking of. In these ahkam, we have two sets of ahkam. Those relating to devotional aspects of the life of a Muslim and the non-devotional ones, the interactions, the social interactions, marriage, contract, the rights of others, everything you can think of outside the ambit of devotions. So these are the three broad categories of the teachings of Islam contained within the book and the Sunnah of the Prophet. I just want to make life a little bit more easier by saying that ahkam are formulations of what a virtuous life is all about. So ahkam inform of how to lead a virtuous life. But these ahkam were delivered in 7th century Arabia. So how should we lead a virtuous life? How ought a virtuous life be led? Was formulated in 7th century Arabia. There is a great indication here. The virtues will not change. What form constitutes the virtue, can that change or not? I think we've said enough, and with that, we will let each table now discuss the two questions that will be posed to them, and I think Sumaya will take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction to our seminar today. I'd like to welcome Brother Rasa Hirji, the President of OIL, to tell you exactly how the table situation is going to work.
Firstly, thank you for Dr. Hussain Kimji, Sheikh Arif, for your introduction and about the book itself. As you know, this has been a tradition to have this seminar every year, and it's always worked very well for us. To me, this is an OIL university because the format we use is like a university by creating a table where a small group of people can discuss a question in depth, and this way there are many people out there who don't like to ask questions, but on a small table they are able to discuss and present their views. I want you to keep in mind that you should not be afraid to speak any part of your thought process. It will not affect you in any wrong way. Feel free to talk about it. That's the important part. Now, the way we've always structured this seminar is this. When people come in, they sit with their friends because they know them. We are trying to build a community of people so you get to know new people as well. So what we are going to do is each table, I want you to take a number. So for example, on this number, table number is this? Okay, you are on table 5, that's fine. Each of you will take a number, starting from 1, 2, 3, and so on. Once that has been settled, and please remember your number, because people forget what number I was. Okay, having done that, then I'm going to ask you, all number ones will go to table number 1, which is over there. Number 2 will go to number 2. This way, I'm going to split you so that husband and wives come together. This automatic system of encouraging interaction with new people, mixed of gender, age group, it automatically comes out. So I'd like to, in the next 5 minutes, please assign yourself a number on each table, and number ones will move to number 1, and number 2 will move to number 2. After that, I'm going to give you one more instructions after that. Can you please do it now? Thank you. Okay, is there any other table here? Okay, can we switch one of you from this table to that one? Yeah. We have had enough influence. Preferably, if they can move, it'd be nice so that you have a more variety of ideas. Excuse me, Atia, before you start, I have one more instructions to give, if I may. Now, the important thing now is this. There are 5 questions on each on the table. I will ask you to first select by consensus. There are 2 ways to handle this, and I don't want to confuse this. Historically, what we have done, we've assigned a question number 1 to table number 1, like that, and they've gone around. Because we have about 8, 9 tables, then the same question is repeated on table number 6, 7, and 8, and so on. There's another way to do this, is this. If there is an interest in just for a show of hands, I'm interested. If there is a question, say number 1, how many people would be interested in that question? Just to get a sense of it. There is 1, question number 1, 2, 3, 4. Anybody else? So there are only 4 people interested in question number 1. You prefer that as well? So there is about 6 or 7 people interested in question number 1. Oh, okay. Give me that question, please. The first question is, what does Islam mean to you in your daily life? And we'll ask you to consider the moral, spiritual, social, and political dimensions. What does Islam mean to you in your daily life? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is, can Islam survive in the 21st century? Whether yes, no, partial, and explain why. If that question interests you, can you please raise your hands? Oh, the whole. It looks like there's a conspiracy over there. Everybody is interested in that question. So in that case, I guess the best, if that is what real interest is, then question number 2 will be on table 1. Yes? So keep that in mind. Can you, Samaya, can you make a note that question number 2 is being discussed on table number 1? Where is Samaya? Can you, somebody make a, yeah? Okay. Question number 3. Compare the conditions of the 7th century of Arabia with the 21st century world. And the sub-question is, how well does the message of the Prophet Muhammad resonate today? And I think Dr. Sheikh Arif alluded to this partially about context of Saudi Arabia. Question number 3, by show of hands, how many people interested in question number 3? There's only 1. You had number 2 as well, interested as well, 2, 3. Okay, we have 3 people so far interested in question number 3. We'll keep that in mind. Question number 4. What type of resistance should be expected to implement progressive changes, and from which quarters? Anybody interested in that question? 1. Question number 4. What type of resistance should be expected to implement progressive changes, and from which quarters would the resistance come from? So how many do we have? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. So we have quite a few here, so maybe 2 tables could do it. Okay, just to get a sense first. Logistic will be tough, okay, but anyway. Last question. Why should Islam appeal to non-Muslims, and especially women? Because there's a lot of questions that women ask. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5. Maybe we can squeeze. So 5 people interested in question number 5. how do we handle this? Am I confusing the issue? Huh? She says yes, I'm confusing the issue. Yes, go ahead. Right now, I would suggest that we spend, is half an hour sufficient for you to discuss? So in half an hour, in the meantime, 45 minutes you need? Remember, too much? Okay, let's take with half an hour, and if it's needed, we talk about it.
So where are the, where are the, basically where you see the vents, right? The AC units
For some of us, it means surrender, and some, it's a way of life that makes us whole and complete. So as we go about our lives, the belief in a power who is so great, infinitely wise, infinitely strong, can do anything and everything, is in control. This belief makes us feel safe, a sense of security, confidence, also gives us a feeling of liberation, that no puny little person can start coming controlling my life, okay, or directing my life. My sustenance is in the hands of that great God, so it makes you feel strong. It doesn't sort of give you that insecurity. The awareness that I'm inadequate, incomplete, and this journey of life is a journey towards completion, makes our lives bearable. Makes it easier to forgive people, because when you look at people and you realize that they are inadequate, they have faults, they have shortcomings, and the same is with me, it makes it easier to forgive people, it makes it easier to forgive myself. Because otherwise the kind of blunders we've made in life when there was no guidance, is enough to sort of put you into a severe depression, or you just lose your mind. So the belief that Allah is always present makes me mindful at my job. I will not start checking my WhatsApp because no one is around. If I say I'm taking a 15-minute break for namaz, I'll make sure that it's 15 minutes and not gone forever. And it's a beautiful, peaceful feeling to live with that I'm only accountable to that one power who knows me through and through. So people can think whatever they want of me, I'm not going to be a people pleaser because I really don't care. Okay, but there are many a times when we question, that was also discussed, where is God? And then they said that I look at nature and feel the presence of God. Then Islam, the capital I Islam, and what we have been taught by parents, madrasa, etc., makes me do the right thing, like I will not shout and fight. I know the right way to behave, but then there was also a question at the table where it was discussed that even if no one had told us what was right and wrong, intuitively, you can feel that right is right. Having said all that, and whether it's a capital I Islam or a small I Islam, there are many times and situations when you're confronted with people where you want to strangle them or you want to really make them into a mush. And that's when God comes into the picture and you realize that, it's okay. He's looking after me and it's okay. And that's what we discussed.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, sister. I think you've taken most of our points. So it'll be easier for me to just quickly state what we had. So we did have a little bit of debate. So we came to a conclusion. So these are the consensus points that we had, we agreed on. First, we did have a discussion. We found it very interesting that the questions were in capital letters. So we weren't sure whether the Islam was a capital I Islam or a small Islam. So the points that we agree on is that most people say that Islam is a reference point in our daily lives. It directs us on how to judge what to do, whether if there is a discussion, that we judge whether we want to continue that discussion or not. Second is that women on the table felt that they are ambassadors and role models, as we were a very symbolic, obvious statement of Islam. And so we're very conscious of how we act. The third point is, so for us, Islam means being kind, humble. It also means being God-centric, and I'm sure the Sheikh has explained us a lot about God-centricity. And we also believe that Islam means full submission to God, which allows us to be grateful, which lets us leave our ego aside and be reliant on God. So even if you don't have anything, you hope and pray to God that He will help you. We also find Islam is a Canadian way of living, and we see that what's preached in Islam is actually practiced in Canada, and it allows us to practice our Islam in a much better way. Thank you.
So my table, can I just see the question, please? My table addressed the question, can Islam survive the 20th century? Yes, no, partial. Explain why. And overwhelmingly, we had this really interesting discussion, and the overwhelming consensus on our table was, yes, it will survive the 20th century. As a matter of fact, it has been surviving within individuals privately, but more importantly, the proof that it is surviving publicly is that it is the strongest growing faith in the world. So it is surviving. However, a little caveat we have to make note that Wahhabism is also surviving. However, we are not sure whether we can even call it Islam. Let's get on with why. Why is Islam surviving? What is its appeal? So, first is it's a book for all ages. It has great principles that address all the facets of human life. However, we made a distinction on our table. We have great thinkers on our table. We made a distinction between survive and thrive. In order for Islam to thrive rather than merely survive, we realize that faith must be in sync with reason. It's not enough to have faith. One must be able to find that it resonates with the issues you have in mind. So in order for it to have that resonance with issues that we have to deal with in everyday life, we need more research, more open-mindedness, addressing issues that will make it relevant to society today. We need interfaith dialogues, strong leadership, strong support from within our group, strong public relations, strong, and not just leadership, we all must be activists within our own right. And how can this be? How can we bring all this about? By ensuring that the Islamic principles that are, or as we call it in this seminar, the Islamic essences that are an integral part of the Quran. These principles we have to see how they address human rights, sectarianism, diversity, and make them relevant to the lives, to our lives in the society we live in today. So, one, we have to be aware that inasmuch as our Islam is growing, Wahhabism is growing. And again, I do not know whether we can call it Islam. To ensure that our Islam continues growing, we end with a question that in the process of rethinking the principles, the essences, and making relevant to our lives today, is there a room for a reformist Islam? Thank you.
Cool. I'd like to begin by saying that we had a very robust conversation about the definition of survival. So we talked about what does survival mean? Does it mean that Islam is going to be a religion that we're talking about 50 years from now, or is it going to be extinct? And it could be survival just because more Muslim countries are having more babies, so we're going to grow in numbers. So we had some of that discussion first. And we landed on, we're going to focus on the survival in the West. I also want to add a very quick point. We had a really great, diverse table ranging from a young lady who's like 13, probably the youngest person in this room, to some more senior, experienced members. So we came to the conclusion that, yes, Islam can survive in the 21st century based on a couple of things that need to happen. One of the things that we talked about was that we need to be progressive and we need to change with the times. So I think this comes back to the form and the subs and the essence. And an example that was raised at the table was the conversations around same-sex marriage. And so the essence versus the form. We also focused on our own growth. And as Muslims, as people are practicing this religion, we need to focus on our own growth and not be so judgmental and accept other faiths and other perspectives and other diverse people and how they practice the faith. We need to follow the Quran, and that is understanding it. We've lost our path. Was the opinion that we need to understand what that means, what the Quran is saying, and practice that. We need to stick to our moral values. And the young people on the table specifically talked about the influence of social media and how does that affect our spirituality and our practice. And one of the things that they gave an example was, for example, the matam and zanjir, the use of matam and zanjir and how we explain it and how we practice it. The pressure to assimilate. I'm just giving you the points. I'm not going to get into the details of that. The other thing that we talked about was that the delivery from our pulpits need to change. So we need to be able to, and this is kind of a secondary point on that, was that we need to be able to differentiate between culture and practices of culture and practices of Islam, and recognize the differences and identify them. The rituals of Islam versus the rituals of culture. Open communication with other faith groups to be able to understand other faiths and for them to understand what Islam is and the possibility of increasing awareness and then the moral teachings. We need to improve on our in our virtuous state. So being truthful, trusting, I think that's what some of the things that we've heard over the last few days. Forgiveness, overcoming our ego is a big conversation. And then progressive in our form as well. And then integrating into society while preserving our practice of the essence of Islam. I think I covered it all, did I?
So we had a very, very lively discussion. And I was drafted at the end here to do this because I think I was being too loud, so I apologize to the group for that. So the question, first of all, we've been asked to discuss was compare the conditions of 7th century Arabia with the 21st century world, and how well does the message of the Prophet Muhammad resonate today, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we first talked about the socio-economic conditions that changed from then, including how the Prophet brought a very systematic change. It wasn't just believing in one God, but about the practices, including the socio-economic structure at the time, right? We talked about the burial of young girls then, and a question was asked, don't we continue to bury our girls today? Not necessarily literally, of course, but with misogyny and the primacy of men in particular family structures. We had a great discussion because we had people from different parts of the world, and they brought their experience to bear on speaking of how things are different from, for example, here in Canada, just here in this room, compared to different centers, and then, of course, to back home, wherever back home may be. We talked about some fiqh issues and how things are frowned upon, particularly on questioning anything. I think we had a very lively discussion on why we can't pray behind a Sunni imam during Salah. It was a question, not necessarily a statement, right? Then we went to the second part of the question, how well does the message of the Prophet resonate today? Many of the group thought that the message resonates as long as you think of the true meaning of the message, right? And I think some of us in the group started questioning, well, I think it really depends on who you're asking that question to. Alhamdulillah, we have a lot of like-minded people here, and we're all believing in the lowercase I Islam, right? But if you go out to the outside world, there are different messages out there on what Islam is. So, for example, there is the idea of it being barbaric and whatnot. And we had a very, very lively discussion on this part because I think the question also then becomes, I think a lot of us are trying to get to a yes and no answer to it, where some of us are trying to say, well, it really, really just depends on who you're asking. And there are many speakers out there who are trying to give that broader view of Islam and what it is, but why is that not resonating? Right? Did I miss anything? I apologize if I have. Uncle Murtaza? Good? Everyone's good? Yeah, okay, great. Thank you.
A very healthy discussion, debate, and I am happy to present our summary of our discussion with everyone here. So our question was, what types of resistance should be expected to implement or make progressive changes, and from where? So we chose to define progressive changes as a broad set of changes, what is expected in way of thinking, way of practice, and we brainstormed of what are the sources of resistance so that we can be more aware. So we looked at different categories, and some are facts, some are open to discussion. In no particular order, but we'll present. One was generational change. Okay, that there tends to be a tendency that as generations get older, or the older generation, they get habituated and more comfortable in the routine, and therefore when a progressive change comes, it just unsettles. So we just have to be aware that I guess that defines the majority of the constituency here, but okay, so that was just one thing. The other thing that came up that was quite interesting is also we can challenge the generational by age to generation by point of entry into the progressive change. So a good example is say the first wave of diversity and immigration to this part of the world, North America, started say about 40 years ago, give or take, right? And so that generation has been here 40 years. They have been exposed to, a set of progressive changes that have forced them to evolve, change, question. But in those 40 years, there is a subset of people who are also consistently entering our circle, right? So in the last 5 years, there could be a bunch of 20-year-olds who've shifted from a different part of the world with a different comfort zone and are here. So that will be a continuous challenge happening over and over again. So without giving examples, I think everybody has examples. There are challenges even from the younger generation. So now most of us can feel better. Most of you can feel better. I still belong to the other younger generation. Okay. Another area of challenge or source of resistance is economic interest. Okay, so we know that because we decided this is a safe space, right? So religion is a business. There are, by necessity, systems in place, right? Catering, servicing, legitimization. So if you have a progression of thought or a progress that will recalibrate the business aspects of religion, that will bring a resistance. So we just have to be aware of it. Whether we agree or disagree is another discussion, but then we can be a little more, accommodating. Another one was fear of ostracization, right? So this led to, again, I'm okay for time because I don't want to ramble. People have comfort zones, right? And this ties into another point which we discuss later is individuals or people, all of us, pick and choose. Uncle Mutaz, you mentioned a word where you look at a whole corpus and you pick and choose what makes sense for you, what makes you comfortable, what makes sense. And what makes sense to me may be different from everybody else. So as long as it doesn't lead to outright violation of rights or human rights, then that's the natural human tendency to want to be accepted and just shut up and go with the status quo because we can't afford to be ostracized. We did discuss whether gender was an issue, whether there was a male, female, or transgender factor in one of these resistance, and we decided no, I think it was evenly balanced. There were other factors that counted, and gender was really not any determinant in the sources of resistance. And one of the last 2 or 3 things we talked about was this whole focus on education, right? So
we talked about education, we talked about what constitutes or define education. Is it information, data collection, which is a starting point, but then the next level of education is where the information gathering now goes to the wisdom, where you know how to use your data to understand what to accept, what to reject, feel safe, so on and so forth. And lack of that education is we decided, a major what you call a form of resistance. It's a resistance towards progression. So in order to overcome that, right, we need to provide education, but not only provide education, provide safe space to discuss. So lack of safe space for most people where they can bring their thoughts, be not judged, is another barrier or a way. Okay. And a couple of comments just to wrap up. We asked the question that, what was it, when we talk of progressive changes, we talk about all these barriers. So what were the barriers that the Prophet faced? Because if we are thinking there's a problem today, well, the Prophet brought Islam, he went through the change. So why are we complaining? What is there more to change? We should take it as it is. And some thoughts that came on the table that are very good that I want to share all with is we invited ourselves to re-examine the prophetic lifestyle. What is it that the Prophet brought that really rattled or brought that, challenge and the resistance of change in his time? Perhaps we're facing the same issue right now. And I think the consensus was that it was not so much about the message of the religion, because a lot of the components of monotheism and belief and God were already there. There was nothing really new. It was actually his emphasis on social justice, gender equality, economic redistribution, so on and so forth. So perhaps on that note, we still have those problems today within the formal Islamic institution that bring about these barriers to change. Okay.
That Mohsin already talked about. We did talk about, we of course also had a very lively exchange, and we talked about areas of change and the types of change, and just by a partial list of the things that we talked about as by way of areas and types of change. Some of the ones that were mentioned were full participation of women in community and national affairs. And and there were equity-related issues, and there was also talking about the gender segregation at our Islamic centers, and another one was about changes that perhaps are going to come in the future that even have to do with the lengths of the fasts within really cold climates. And the other thing that one person at our table talked about was the definition of zakat, and another person spoke about the non-transparency of khums, receipts and disbursements. So these were some of the areas that we people at this table anticipated that change is due and it's going to come. Now, as far as some of the key things that have been the problem in that they cause these problems to exist and things becoming stuck, one is the ignorance of the masses and of small-mindedness on the part of many people, because they either didn't get enough of an education to begin with, or that they resist simply because they didn't learn to think rationally and to think that there are, that not only is the human body dynamic minute by minute, like our level of hydration, our level of nutrition, our level of blood pressure, heart rate, etc. Everything is, in fact, subject to change. And in the same way, human societies are subject to change because of not just the pace of technology, but the effects of technology on family life and not just the attitudes of the people within the family. We also did talk about patriarchy and clinging to culture as opposed to knowing, understanding, and following the essence of the faith that Sheikh Arif has been talking quite a lot about. I think there is still a lot of ignorance we talked about in our group, the ignorance of the essence of the Quran, and what we considered and talked about are the shortcomings of both formal and informal education, in that most people are simply never taught the difference between adl and zul. And because of that, people, depending upon their types of personalities, either they're going through life like the proverbial bull in the china shop and not even aware that, the things that they're saying are essentially hurting people left, right, and center, or that they are really creating all kinds of conflict within families, within job locations, or wherever human interaction happens. I mean, even instances of road rage, for example, is talking about, failure to think about consequences and the very need for fairness and respect. So then we talked about also what might be the sources of oppositions. And some of the things that we talked about was that, certain governments that have been more, sort of hardline governments in the past, and specifically 3 countries were mentioned, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq. Even though in Iran, I know that women have been working in all fields of life since at least the 60s. And since I was born and raised in Pakistan, I know that, Pakistan was just an amazing experience for people to grow up and to be educated. And so in my mother's generation, for example, maybe only 3 of her or 4 of her cousins got university degrees, whereas in my generation, every one of my cousins got university degrees or more than like second degrees. So that's sort of their way of thinking, and their participation in the workforce is very different from what it might be in other places. We also talked about that there could be some very conservative scholars, and they might say, no, this kind of change is not going to happen. Bina bar ihtiyat. Then they also, our group said that the people over age 50, 60, 70, and you name it, are more likely to be opposed to change as opposed to the younger generation. And if we look at it on a worldwide basis and not just look at our Shia 12er group, we felt that first of all, there are Shia subgroups that are going to resist change. And then there are certain Sunni schools that are so hardline in their attitudes and so 7th century, they're just going to hate it. And they're going to do the takfir business. Anybody who, it's my way or the highway. And if you don't think like me, sorry, you're outside of the bounds of Islam. So that's essence is what we discussed.
Somehow the introvert of the table got chosen to be up here.
Also taller than everyone.
And I can't imagine you as a room full of sheep, because I realized there are very intellectual people in here, so I'm going to do my best. We were addressing why should Islam appeal to non-Muslims, especially women. We first discussed how, I think somebody mentioned, how Islam is the fastest growing religion. And we were looking into reasons why that would be. In applying specifically to women, the first maybe crucial point was the way in which the Prophet Muhammad presented the status and the role and the identity of the woman. At that point, we discussed how the other religions before that also may have had a very special place for women, but what distinguishes that with the whole comprehensive view that the Prophet Muhammad brought, because there were rights that didn't exist before his time. So we believe because there was a complete sense of identity, roles for women, and a complete set of rights for women that he actually brought, became a very appealing aspect of Islam for women. Because if you actually look at what's going on in the modern world right now with social media and all of that, I personally have observed that women are still struggling to find a sense of identity. And Islam gives a very, very strong sense of identity to women. We talked about movements like women's liberation and the whole feminist movement. Why would things like that be happening? It's when women aren't finding their place or identities or roles, they would want to find avenues that make them feel important in society, and hence all these movements are coming up. But if you were to actually present the Prophet's view on a woman, it would be very appealing. But I have to say that when the discussion began, we had a varied view of whether women would even be attracted to Islam, or would it be appealing at the present moment because of media. So first we established that in order to make it appealing, we have to make sure that the right Islam and the right image of women in Islam is portrayed. Because what is being portrayed a lot of times because of rules or laws of specific countries like Saudi Arabia or whatever, do not help the women to really find it very appealing. We also talked about the sense of, actually building onto the sense of identity, the sense of belonging to a community. There's a very strong sense of belonging within the community for women, and it is also something that is a very intrinsic nature of women to have community and a sense of belonging and identity. There are some points that were not specific to women, but in general to non-Muslims that were brought up. One was that Islam does not need a clergy to connect to God. And I asked for that point to be elaborated because I feel that the Islam I've learned does have a clergy. And what somebody said then there was that if you needed to confess, you wouldn't have to go to someone to confess. You talk directly to God. There isn't a clergy that will stand as your middleman to God. One interesting point that someone brought up was that certain groups of people actually have an appeal that could have nothing to do with the roles or identity, but for something that speaks to them. So one example was that there was a group of West Africans, a huge group of West Africans that were drawn to Islam only because there was an area in West Africa that discovered or introduced early blues music and rap through Quranic reading. That was the sole reason for a group, because that's what they would find encouraging. We have to think for their needs at that point, and that was appealing for them towards Islam. But all in all, in summarizing it, for women, it has given them a sense of identity and roles, and it is so specific in that it actually dissipates all the confusion in the minds of women if the right Islam were to be portrayed, and gives them a very safe zone to operate as women without the need to get out and fight for your rights, because they're already there. We just haven't portrayed them well enough. I think that's about it.
He will bring it together and provide his insight into where do we go from here. But just a quick question for my interest. How have you found the discussion? Has it been worthwhile for your time? Thank you, very good. But one thing I was very worried when Atiyah came forward and he said that they can see resistance from people who are 50, 60, and 70. And I was wondering whether I'm in that group. So just everyone believes that they are not resistant to change. Just a point, I hope that this has brought awareness and some of the things that you were thinking, whether you've changed your mind, because one of the exercise here is, has anything changed your mind? Or have your ideas have remained same? Ask yourself that question. I think you will find it very interesting to reflect, what has changed in me? How has this discussion transformed me in any way at all? And that
Looking around and listening to the conversations taking place at the tables, and I must say I was enlightened, and mashallah, such a mature level of discussion and an intellectual level of discussion. And it just shows that the community, alhamdulillah, is moving on and has moved on a great deal, and people are thinking outside the box and are brave enough to say things that they feel intuitively without feeling that they will be in any form of trouble with God. Now, on the first question, what does Islam mean to you in daily life? Now, I did not see anybody talking about Islam informing us in terms of our devotions and in terms of our interactions with others. Everybody obviously spoke of the ideal situation of the beautiful moral traits, but nobody said that Islam teaches us how to pray in one direction 5 times a day. It doesn't, it teaches us to be one with the greater ummah. I think these are very powerful teachings of the Islamic faith, which the rest of the faiths might lack, because they don't have this sense that unifies them and gives them this identity. Nor did anybody talk about how Islam teaches us how to think of the other. Now, there are a lot of negative things as well, that the other is najis, or that Islam has double standards in terms with interaction with Muslims and non-Muslims, or Shias and non-Shias. What I'm saying is, it's nice to talk about Islam in a positive light, but there are also many negatives there within our teachings, because as soon as we identify it, we can see that this is an area that needs to be reconsidered. So Islam does say majority of the people are najis, for example. Or Islam does teach that within a non-Muslim context, we are at liberty, at times it used to teach this, to take advantage of that context. Or Islam did teach, as till the time of Sayyid Khoury and Sayyid Khomeini, that we cannot refer to the law courts within non-Muslim countries to retrieve our rights. And even if our rights are given to us, they are not ours because of the verses of the Quran, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ كَافِرُونَ, whatever. So the positives came out, but the way in which Islam informs of the spiritual aspects of life didn't come out at that level, which is a definite plus point of Islam, but didn't come out within the comments. And the negatives did not come out, which I feel are the sticking points, because it's informing us of the attitude that we need to have towards the other, and it is a very inconsistent attitude with human values right now. So this is something I know which is there, but I think we might have just shied away from addressing that. Point 2, can Islam survive the 21st or within the 21st century? So we said yes, it's the strongest growing faith and so on and so forth. It has this appeal, and beautiful things came out there, that individually people find purpose, meaning to life, so it will survive. There was a distinction between survival and thriving. Now then I noticed that there was a very negative comment about Wahhabism. Now here I would like to ask the Shia community, do you actually know what Wahhabism is? Where it derives from? Or is it a term which is a negative term being used by the Shias to depict a particular theology known as the Salafi theology? I would ask the same question of our Salafi brothers who say the Rafidis are all bad. I would like to ask them, do you know what Rafidi means? It's a negative word with negative connotations that is used to describe Shia Imami Islam. Are we not here pointing out at the causes of destruction of Islam? In fact, how can Islam survive within the 21st century with these sort of sectarian tendencies that we have? Even if we say that we are non-sectarian, the fact that we can say that there is Islam and interpretations of Islam and totally misguided interpretation such as Wahhabism, then we ourselves are planting the seeds of destruction for Islam. That's just my observation here, yes? Now, I go to Saudi Arabia, I sit with the Salafis, eat with them, talk with them, travel with them. I find majority of them to be reasonable people and very good people. I find a group of them to be extremists. I find the Salafi are very audacious people in reforming the law of Islam. Did you know that the Sunnis will not pray with the Shias and the Shias will not pray with the Sunnis, but the Salafis will say we have no problem praying with the Shias and behind the Shias. They have their own fiqh, we have our own fiqh, and that does not invalidate prayer. The takfiri part of Salafis is one part. The ISIS intolerant part of Salafi is one part. We cannot brand them all with that label. But I want to ask another question. Are the Imami any better? The books of our great scholars, they say that the only reason we tolerate Sunni is not because they are worthy of it. We can do their ghibah, we can cheat them, we can do whatever we want. We can take their women as well. Sheikh Ansari, listen to that World Federation debate that they had with me. I've quoted him there. It's a way of me promoting that as well. In which Sheikh Ansari says it's only because of the necessity of social cohesion that we tolerate them, that we give them rights. So here I want to ask this group who call themselves the Imami or the Shias and they frown upon the Wahhabis, that have we understood our own theology? Is it any different? The answer is, it isn't. And so, with all the positive things that we heard for point number 2, that Islam in essence is beautiful, it gives a sense of belonging, a sense of morality, we need to take note of the threat that is there as well. And the threat is sectarianism, lack of education, lack of willingness to look at the other from their perspective, the lack of overcoming our biases. So as much as we feel here that we are people who are not indoctrinated, in fact, we prove to ourselves that we are as indoctrinated as anybody else may be. I hope my comments are not sharp and are not rude and are not offensive. Forgive me if they are. Yes? Sorry, because I'm saying this to myself, yes? Because I'm learning all of this about my own self. You know, I'm just saying that to you, right? Compare the conditions of 7th century Arabia to the 21st century. Now here, we were told burial of daughters, literal appreciation of the text. We are in a new context. All of these meanings were hitting at one meaning in principle, that there is an essence of Islam that was formulated in 7th century Arabia. That essence of Islam requires reformulation within 21st century Canada. So if I can summarize those sentiments that were given in point number 3, that's what I feel came out of those observations. Number 4, what types of resistance should be expected to implement progressive changes, and from which quarters? So we got this, and they're very, very insightful, that the people who will oppose it are the people who are moving in from different regions. They would want to retain their own understanding, or in order to protect the status quo. But nobody said, I mean, we talked about the economic factors, but nobody clearly said that the hierarchy would not wish to have the status quo challenged, because they would lose out on a lot of authority, power, and wealth. The other thing is, and we can't deny, we are insecure people. Every time we talk about progress, there is this nagging doubt in there, that are we going against the will of God? Are we going to be punished? We are very insecure. The third thing is, well, what makes me belong to this sect anyway, if I'm going to get rid of these things? How do I qualify myself as a Muslim, or as an Imami, or as a Shia, or as a Salafi, so on and so forth? So there are pressing issues here. So the resistance is not only going to come from where we think, it's coming right from the top to the everyday follower of the faith. All of us are resisting change, and that is natural, because we have not been able to understand where change can take place legitimately. If we know that there is an area of Islam that is not sacred, and it can be changed, and the agency of change can be the human mind, then we would not hesitate. So this is something we need to consider, that yes, there is a huge problem, and we need to work out, can we change things? Is progression really allowed, given that the book of God is eternal and universal? This is the topic for tonight, yes? And it will maybe continue into tomorrow as well. If it is, then what's the area in which change can occur? What is the framework in which we can start thinking? How can it be a legitimate rethinking? At that point, at least resistance will not be from the insecurities of the grassroots or their lack of knowledge. At that point, the resistance will only be from those people who have a lot to lose by changing the status quo, by bringing in progression. Number 5, why should Islam appeal to non-Muslims, especially women? I assume that women are not non-Muslim women, right? Means women in their entirety? Yes. Okay. It's the fastest growing religion. The way the Prophet presented the status of women would obviously appeal to women. There it is, yes. And so on and so forth. So I'm just saying that's fine. It appealed to women at the time when the Prophet came, because it gave them a legal and a social identity and personality. Where there were non-entities, it gave them a personality that, look, you are an entity. You have rights. And it was way beyond anywhere else in the world. You know, women could not inherit, they could not divorce in the Western sort of societies. You know that, right? In Islam, all of this was there. But today's woman, would she be appealed by the reforms the Prophet made 1,400 years ago? The answer is maybe not. The failure here is of the Muslim mind that if that great man initiated such progress in his time, he merely initiated the whole discourse of the right of women. He did not conclusively deal with it. The problem that the Muslim has is he feels that the Blessed Prophet initiated it and concluded the discussion. And that's why we all say that the Prophet initiated the trend of freeing slaves, but he never concluded it, that it is fully abolished. So we have this tension there. He merely initiated the discussion and he was centuries ahead of his time. Yes? Centuries ahead of his time. But today's woman has now progressed even beyond the reforms that the Prophet brought in his own context. So the present day woman may not be appealed by this Islam, and I think we have to be honest about it. Maybe in certain regions she may be, where there is total lack of rights of women, but definitely in the first world or the developed world, women may not be. Yet women are embracing Islam. Majority of the converts to Islam are women and are men. So where is the appeal? Now, through my understanding, Islam gives a sense of belonging, community, discipline, direction. When these reverts to Islam are interviewed, I'm not talking about the intellectuals, their motivations might be the eternal truths of Islam, but I'm talking about the everyday people. They say we were like scattered beings. It's giving us grounding, a sense of deeper purpose, a belonging to the community. It's instilling discipline within us. We know we have to pray to God 5 times a day. We are belonging to God through a community. And that's the huge appeal Islam has, the communal identity. And that's been one of the greatest forces of Islam, the Ummah, the beautiful Ummah, identity. So even though there is a lot that is lacking right now in terms of rights in Islam, yet this sense of spiritual alignment with God, this sense of belonging to the broader community, it's amazing. You go to Makkah, everybody will say Assalamu alaikum, Inshallah, MashaAllah, pray at the same time. It's phenomenal in the same direction. There are 3 million people from different parts of the world, but you're all one. A Muslim can take off from any region of the world, go to any region of the world, he will feel at home or she will feel at home because of that language, common belief, prayer, so on and so forth. I feel that has been the huge appeal of Islam and shall not cease to be. But as far as all the other considerations are concerned, I think we are falling behind. Anyway, these are my comments, and thank you so much. If anybody, I did ask, if anybody does want to comment, please do so. We have a few minutes for that.
Right, with the appeal of the Muslim women, not the full veil and all that, but at least the hijab and the modesty and all that, would that not appeal to them?
Absolutely. A woman spoke with me recently. She's an English lady. She said after she put on the hijab, she's been objectified more by the Muslim men than ever before. Because they're all asking her if she's single and if she wants to get married. She's being white and blue eyes and whatever, right? So she said, I am now contemplating on taking off the hijab in order to ward off this unwanted attention. So you're right, definitely objectification is something that women don't like, and if that dress of modesty is obviously giving them a sense of being respectable creatures by the onlooker, that's a huge appeal. Yeah? So I agree, but as is always the case with me, I'll always give an opposite example to prove your point, right?
I have a question, actually. It's not really a question. I'd rather maybe just get more clarification from you. The one point that you mentioned is that we're getting converts or reverts because of the community, sense of community that we have. But previously you also mentioned that I think we're as a community, we're a backward community, or we don't want to progress because we have this subconscious feeling of not wanting to progress. So I get the point that from that point, you're saying we should all be separate ways, we should all sort of be on our own, we should think on our own way, or maybe we should have a sense of thinking. But so how would you combine these two things, sense of community and wanting to progress? And I don't know if you get the point, though.
I'll try. We've still got a few. Do you attend the evening lectures?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so you'll find more clarity as the rest of the days go on. When I talk about plurality, I talk about plurality as an existential feature. We have to be different, all of us. That's the way God has made us. In that, we have devotional aspects, which are identity markers. Yes, our spirituality, how is it expressed? In essence, spirituality is belonging to God. How is it marked? By facing this direction, that direction, doing ruku, sajda, hajj, siyam. As opposed to that, there is that level of human interaction and existence. That is the place where Sharia has no say. Sharia merely comes from time to time to tweak those forms of interaction to make them less abusive and fairer. I'm saying that round there is where humanity stands as one family. There is no Muslim, there is no Christian, there is no Jew, there is no Buddhist. It is this area in which we have fallen behind because we have said that this area is also a part of the eternal essence. It's nothing to do with the essence, it's a mere form, yes? That is where we have fallen behind, and all the world's religions need to question their notion of the sacredness of the forms of interaction that the religions gave, and they all need to reform it to bring it up to universal standards. However, it will also have relativity in terms of region to region. If we get the time, Tuesday will be the day, or Wednesday, when we explain that a little bit more. Yes?
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so very much for the wonderful concluding remarks actually from you. From my experience, everything that you have said is absolutely correct. The other thing that I find in my experience in teaching, foreign students, non-Muslim students, and also speaking to the groups in the churches and in the synagogues, I find that, that Islam, apart from this, concept of ummah and, plurality, which is very, very correct, absolutely correct. The other thing is really fitrah. I really find, that beautiful Quranic ayat about the fitrah is really so true because, when you speak about, true Islam, I've had people, especially in the churches, not so much in synagogues, but in the churches, Christians have come with tears in their eyes. This is Islam. Why don't you guys speak about it? Why don't you speak, write about it? So, fitrah as well, it's a great attraction also for my students as well. And, some scholars, as you know, of course, that they are describing that fitrah that is revealed in the Quran is the example given by some scholars, mufassirin, is that it's like a compass needle. A compass needle always points to the north. But if there are no obstacles, it will move away.
Yeah.
But you remove obstacles, and the needle will jump back to the north. Exactly like that. If you speak to people, and in your experience as well, I'm sure that you've seen it. That once you remove the obstacles, then people immediately get attracted to Islam.
So that's fitratun salima, and I suppose that we can equate that with the ilham of Allah to the nature, what is good and what is evil.
Yes.
And I suppose we can call that intuition as well. Yes, that
Absolutely.
fitrah, intuition, leads only to that which is most beautiful, and that's the hallmark of righteousness within Islam.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And the other thing as well is, that if I start, speaking to the to the Christian group and said, if God wanted, the Quran actually tells us this, if God wanted, he would have made us all of one community.
One people, yeah.
But it is in his wisdom. And,
To keep us
and then
different.
Also, Surah Al-Hujurat, ayat number 13, how beautiful it is. So,
إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَىٰ. Yes. Subhanallah. Thank you, doctor. Thank you. Thank you.
We're here today and the topic that we're talking about. I thought I would share something. I was a speaker at a United Church in Inglewood, Ontario, just north of Brampton, on the Sunday after 9/11. And the minister of that church is Dr. Maria Mincenti. And so after she made her speech, she had asked me to talk about Islam and that Islam does not teach the kind of crime that of killing all these people by crashing planes into skyscrapers. And then in order to get the people to sort of acknowledge me, she asked that as people leave, come and stand with me at the door as everybody's leaving. So if you could just shake hands with everybody who comes and just look them in the eye, and the way you spoke was just fine and very nice. So there was only one guy out of probably 150 people. He came to me, he didn't shake hands, he was an older guy, and he said, "Do you honestly believe in the things that you have told us about Islam today?" And I said, "I absolutely do. This is how I live Islam." And so he didn't argue or anything beyond that. And so, yeah, as you said, Christians are just craving this kind of thing. I made one speech at the Toronto, the Zonta Club of Toronto, which is a service club. And before I knew it, she said, "Atiya, before I went to bed, I wrote an email to all the Zonta clubs in our whole area, all 6 of them, to say, you got to ask Atiya to come and speak to your group." So this is Islam, right? And we can all share it.
MashaAllah.
Anybody else has?
I just want to let Sheikh Arif know. I would just like to let Sheikh Arif know that your criticism of our criticism of Wahhabism is well taken.
Is what?
Your criticism
Of
of
your-
our criticism
of
of
Wahhabism.
Wahhabism is well taken. So
Thank you.
sleep well tonight.
No, thank you, thank you. I've been accused of being a Wahhabi mole, so I have to defend them.
Also, I did realize how that could be seen as promoting sectarianism.
Yeah.
Right?
No, sorry, I was just giving my
Yeah.
humble sort of analysis on it.
Yeah. And if there's, I don't know if there's any, I want to use this moment while I have the mic to also thank Raza and all the organizers of this wonderful seminar. A lot of hard work goes into organizing something like this. And I also want to thank you, Sheikh Arif, and Hussain Kimji, he's gone. But thank you, Sajjad, thank you for all of those who made this today possible. We have learned, and I think we've transformed a wee bit.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. We all learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks,
I'm really going to find out who my true friends are after I say what I say right now. And how safe is this place, really? I kind of feel that the fact that we have an ummah is not unique. Christians do that every Sunday. We do it every Thursday and at Jummah prayers. Jews go to the synagogue. So if we're patting ourselves on our backs saying, well, we have an ummah, well, guess what? We're not unique. I just gave you 2 other examples that I know of, and I'm sure there's hundreds of others. Hindus go to the temple for all their occasions. But I also feel that for us to sit here and, I mean, it's wonderful that we've had other people listen to the essence of Islam and say, I didn't know this is what Islam was. But then we just finished saying over the last 5 nights that all religions have the same essence. The essence has been eternal, universal, and will remain fluid for times to come. That's what I think if we were really honest, that's what attracted us to our religion, where we start to flux and sort of question ourselves and then question the Word of God and whether that Word of God is Gita or Bible or Torah or whatever your Word of God is. We're questioning the form. So again, why are we then trying to stick ourselves to a label of I follow Islam with a capital I, and you're a Christian, and because if you really think about it, these are labels created by us to maybe give us a sense of belonging, that, okay, I belong to this group and you belong to that group, when really the essence we're following is the absolute same. Now, whether I take the path of Christianity to arrive at that Sirat al-Mustaqim, because we said there's one road but 1,000 ways to get it, so why is it that I'm so adamant on saying, I'm a Muslim? Why can't I just say I'm a human first and everything else later?
Thank you very much for that lovely comment. Oh, I'm sorry, I just need a nicotine fix. It's because, I've had food, and after food, seriously. Are you a male or a woman or a female?
I'm a human first.
But what would you identify yourself as when you get married? A man or a woman?
Physically, yeah, woman.
Okay. Are you a Canadian or an Eskimo? Sorry. I'm just asking questions in order to clarify things.
Yeah.
So in essence, we are humans, yes?
Yeah.
In essence, we are humans, but nonetheless, for now, we are man or woman. Yes? We are Eskimos or we are Canadians. Yes? Medically, they will need to know our ethnicity in order to trace back the history of our ailments and prescribe the best medication. Identity in the physical sense, I need to explain this, but our time has run out in the evening lectures, so please listen to my other lectures at LA and others, where we have particular and universal cultures. Because we are materially bound, we are universal beings. We are not man, not woman. The human soul is not gender, it's a gender, a religion, everything. Nothing belongs to the human, but now we are in this world. And this world is of specification, individuality. I need to explain that at some point in the evening lectures. That individuality of necessity demands grouping. Yeah? Male, female, ethnicity, so on and so forth. In that grouping, we find arbitrary sense of identity, and that identity is an existential need within this worldly context of ours. In that, we say, I am a human. I am a Muslim, I am a Khoja, I am a male, I am a female, I am a Canadian. That is where the grouping part comes in. It's a necessity of the material constitution of the unlimited godly spirit. Yes? We need to reconcile between these things, and of course, I would ask you to listen to the LA lectures. I haven't had the time to explain this here, but inshallah, want to hint at that in the evening lectures. But otherwise, I agree with everything that you've just said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for participating and engaging with the conversations that we've been having today. I'd like to invite Brother Azahirji for the closing remarks.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I don't want to take too long. I know we've gone over half an hour beyond our time. Partly it's not the fault of the management, but I think the food part was delayed, and I apologize for that one. I just want to say a couple of words only. What the Sheikh mentioned about building a community, and I think that at OIL here, we have trying very hard to do a few things. There are three objectives. One is to build a community of people like yourselves who believe in progressive thinking and modernizing, not modernizing, but focusing on the essence of Islam. And you will notice that all our programs are towards spiritual focus rather than ritual focus. So keep that in mind. The second part is to provide a space for free and liberal thinking to question without fear. That's a very important piece in the vision that we have. Also, to provide a space where people have an opportunity to contribute their skills, their knowledge to the rest of the people. This way, we build a community and friendship. So I hope that you and your friends will invite more young people to come forward and be part of this. And lastly, if there are any topics or programs that you feel OIL can do, we welcome your suggestions and we'll be happy to put that into practice. Thank you and Assalamu alaikum.